My name is Clara Pierce, I'm 38 years old, and I'm about to have my own father thrown out of the hotel he doesn't know I own. Before I tell you how his jaw hit the marble floor, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you for being here, and I hope you're having a good day. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. The air in the lobby of my flagship Chicago hotel always hummed with a quiet energy. It was a symphony of soft conversations, the distant clink of glasses from the bar, and the scent of fresh lilies that I had delivered every morning. It was the heart of my empire, a place of calm and control. My control. Until that Tuesday. A voice, a booming, entitled voice that sliced through the calm, made my head snap up from the concierge desk where I was quietly observing the guest flow. I didn't need to see him to know who it was. That voice was etched into my memory, a sound I had spent half my life trying to escape. There he was. My father, Richard Pierce. His face was flushed a blotchy red, his expensive suit looking tight and uncomfortable as he jabbed a finger at Michael, my front desk manager. Michael, a man I trusted with a multi-million-dollar operation, was standing his ground with the patience of a saint. I don't think you understand, my father's voice carried across the lobby, turning heads. I am Richard Pierce. I was personally invited to the Pinnacle Summit. I require a penthouse suite. My mother, Margaret, stood slightly behind him, clutching her purse like a shield, her face a mask of strained politeness. My sister, Amelia, was glued to her phone, pretending none of this was happening. And my brother, Leo, he was smirking, enjoying the show. The whole miserable cast was here. I felt a cold, familiar calm wash over me. It was the same feeling I'd had 20 years ago, the day I walked out of their house with nothing but a duffel bag and a promise to myself that I would never, ever be weak in front of them again. I pushed off the desk and started walking toward them. My heels made no sound on the thick Persian rug. They didn't see me coming until I was standing right beside my father. Is there a problem here? I asked, my voice even and quiet. My father barely glanced at me, waving a dismissive hand. This doesn't concern you, miss. We're dealing with management. Mississippi. He didn't even recognize me. 20 years, a new haircut, and a life he never bothered to track had erased me from his memory. The sting of it was sharp, but I pushed it down. It was fuel now. Michael's eyes met mine over my father's shoulder, and I gave him the slightest nod. He understood. Sir, Michael said, his voice firm, as I explained, all our penthouse suites are booked for the summit. We have a lovely junior suite available. Unacceptable! Richard roared. The man who invited me, the CEO of this entire hotel chain, will hear about this incompetence. My mother finally looked at me, a flicker of something, annoyance? Confusion, in her eyes. Leo looked up from his phone, his smirk widening as he took in the scene. He loved watching our father bully his way through life. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting my father's words hang in the air, echoing his own arrogance. I watched the other guests trying not to stare. I saw the discomfort on my mother's face. This was the empire I had built. This was the sanctuary I had created. And he was poisoning it. I took a slow breath, the scent of lilies filling my lungs. It was time. I turned my full attention to the red-faced man who shared my blood but nothing else. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I let him see the 20 years of struggle, of work, of building, in my eyes. On the contrary, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It concerns me very much. Tell me, Dad, don't you recognize your own daughter? The pillars of my world were built of steel, concrete, and kindness. My grandparents, Eleanor and Arthur Hayes, taught me that. They weren't flashy people. They started Hayes Precision Engineering with a loan from a friend and a garage full of second-hand tools. Their hands were calloused, their clothes were practical, and their home, a simple brick house in the suburbs of Chicago, always smelled like my grandmother's apple pie and the faint, clean scent of motor oil from my grandfather's workshop. That house was my real home. My parents, Richard and Brenda, lived in a different universe. Their house was a modern glass box with white furniture you were afraid to sit on. It was a showroom, not a home. They spoke a different language, too, one of country club memberships, charity galas, and what the neighbors thought. I spent my childhood shuttling between those two worlds. At my parents' house, I was a prop. When I won the state science fair in 10th grade, my mother smiled for the photographer and then whispered, "Clara, for heaven's sake, stand up straight. The Hemingways are watching." My father clapped me on the back and asked if this would look good on a college application. There was no joy in it. It was just another asset to be leveraged. A promotion for the family brand. But at my grandparents' house, it was different. When I brought the same blue ribbon to them, my grandfather picked it up, held it to the light, and said, "Look at that, Eleanor. The girl's got a mind for systems." He then took me out to the workshop, pulled out a complex blueprint for a new gear assembly, and spent the next hour showing me how the math I used in my project was the same math that made bridges stand and engines run. My grandmother framed the ribbon and hung it in the kitchen, right next to a picture of me with a missing front tooth. That was the difference. My parents saw my achievements. My grandparents saw me. They taught me everything that mattered. Grandma Eleanor taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to make a perfect pie crust, and how to look a person in the eye and know if they were telling the truth. "Most people's lies live in their shoulders, honey," she'd say. "Watch how they hold themselves." Grandpa Arthur taught me the beauty of a well-made machine. He believed that the world ran on integrity, the integrity of a steel beam, a line of code, or a person's word. I remember one afternoon, after my brother Kevin had blamed me for breaking a window with a baseball, my grandfather sat me down. He didn't ask who did it. He just looked at me and said, "Clara, always protect what you build. Whether it's a company or your own good name. Not everyone who shares your name shares your values." The words stuck with me. Those were the years that built me. They were my foundation. And then, in a single moment, that foundation was shattered. It was a Thursday. A gray, meaningless October Thursday. I was at my desk, running data analysis for a logistics firm, when my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number from a Wisconsin area code. "Am I speaking with Clara Hayes?" a man's voice asked. It was flat, official. "This is she," I said, my eyes still on my screen. "Ma'am, my name is Officer Riley with the Wisconsin State Patrol. I'm calling about Arthur and Eleanor Hayes. There was a collision on I-94, just outside of Milwaukee." The world stopped. The numbers on my screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. "A collision?" I repeated, my voice a whisper. Are they okay?" There was a pause. The kind of professional, practiced pause that precedes the worst news of your life. "Ma.m," he said, his voice softening just a little. "There were no survivors. I'm so sorry for your loss." The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. I don't remember saying goodbye. I just remember the silence that followed, a silence so loud it felt like a physical blow. The two pillars that had held up my entire world were gone. The funeral was a blur of black suits and empty words. My mother, Brenda, wore a veil and dabbed at her dry eyes, her face angled perfectly for the sympathetic gazes of her friends. My father, Richard, stood at the back, shaking hands and talking in low tones about the stock market. At the graveside, as the pastor spoke of eternal rest, I watched my father whisper something to my uncle that made them both chuckle. It felt like a desecration. My brother Kevin spent the entire time texting. They were performing grief, and they were terrible actors. I stood there, numb, clutching the small, worn compass my grandfather had given me when I was a child. It was the only thing that felt real. 2 weeks after the funeral, the letter arrived. It was from a law firm, Peterson and Associates, requesting my presence for the reading of the will of Arthur and Eleanor Hayes. My presence, and that of my parents, my brother Kevin, and my Aunt Carol. The law office was on the top floor of a skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan. The room was sterile and silent, filled with expensive leather chairs and the scent of lemon polish. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table as if he were chairing a board meeting. My mother was scrolling through her phone, occasionally sighing dramatically. Kevin was slouched in his chair, earbuds in, until my father shot him a glare. Mr. Peterson, a kind-faced man in his late 60s who I remembered from my grandparents' Christmas parties, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, shuffling a thick stack of papers. "Before we begin, I want to state for the record that Arthur and Eleanor were of perfectly sound mind when they drafted this final will and testament last year. They even underwent independent evaluations to confirm it. Their choices were deliberate." My father waved a hand impatiently. "We understand, Peterson. Let's just get to the inheritance." The disrespect felt like a slap. Mr. Peterson's jaw tightened, but he continued. He read through the standard legal language, revocations of previous wills, executor appointments. My family fidgeted, their boredom and anticipation a toxic cloud in the room. Then, he got to the section they were all waiting for. "And now," he said, looking over his glasses at all of us, regarding the distribution of the estate. He took a breath. "I, Arthur Hayes, and I, Eleanor Hayes, do hereby bequeath our entire estate, including all properties, liquid assets, investment portfolios, and controlling shares in Hayes Precision Engineering, totaling an approximate value of $26 million. I could feel the energy in the room shift. My father sat up straighter. My mother put her phone down. "To our beloved granddaughter, Clara Hayes." The silence was a physical thing. It pressed down on me, sucking the air out of the room. I just stared at Mr. Peterson. $26 million? It was an impossible number. Then the silence shattered. "What?" My father's voice was a low growl. My mother's pearl necklace clinked against the table as she leaned forward. "That can't be right. There must be a mistake." Kevin yanked his earbuds out. $26 million? To her? Mr. Peterson held up a hand, his face grim. "There's more." He continued reading, his voice firm. "We have intentionally and with full consideration made no provision in this will for our son, Richard Hayes, our daughter-in-law, Brenda Hayes, our grandson, Kevin Hayes, or our daughter, Carol Wallace, as we have provided for them sufficiently during our lifetimes." That's when the explosion I saw a glimpse of in the beginning truly happened. "This is absurd," my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "They were senile. You, old man, you and her," he pointed a trembling finger at me, "you manipulated them." "Richard, that's enough," Mr. Peterson said, his voice cold. "I gave 20 years of my life to that company," he bellowed. "A lie. 20 years of long lunches and showing up late. It should be mine." "Before this escalates," Mr. Peterson said, pressing a button on a remote. A screen descended from the ceiling. And suddenly, they were there. My grandparents. Seated on their familiar floral sofa, looking right at us. My breath caught in my throat. Grandpa Arthur spoke first, his voice as steady as I'd always remembered it. "If you're watching this, it means we're gone." He looked directly into the camera. "Clara, we left everything to you because you are the only one who ever understood what we were building. Not the money, but the meaning behind it. You have integrity, and you have a good heart. We trust you." Then my grandmother looked forward, her eyes soft but her voice firm. "To our other children," she said, and I saw the pain in her expression. "We love you. But you value things over people. You value status over substance. This isn't a punishment. It's a final lesson. We hope you learn it." The screen went dark. I looked around the table. My Aunt Carol was openly weeping, but they didn't look like tears of grief. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. My brother was just staring at me, his mouth hanging open. And my father, his face was a terrifying mask of purple rage. Their faces were masks of greed and rage. I knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. The war had been declared. If you've been listening this far, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've given me a like, and I'll know you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment with a number 1, and listen as I continue my story. The ride home from the lawyer's office was silent, but it was the loudest silence I had ever experienced. I drove my own car, but I could feel their anger following me like a storm cloud. I got to my small apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like I had just survived a car crash. The peace lasted less than an hour. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. My house. 7 p.m. We are settling this tonight. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to block his number and hide. But another part, the part that my grandparents had built, knew that I couldn't. Running from this would only make it worse. So at 7 o'clock, I walked into the cold, white showroom they called a house. They were all there, waiting for me in the formal living room, a room I had never seen them actually live in. It felt like walking into an ambush. My father stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. My mother was perched on the edge of a white sofa, her lips a thin, hard line. Kevin was sprawled in an armchair, tapping furiously on his phone. "Sit down, Clara," my father commanded. I remained standing. "I'm fine here." He took a gulp of his whiskey and slammed the glass down on the mantel. "Don't be difficult. This situation is a mess, a product of your grandparents' declining minds. You know that." "I know nothing of the sort," I said, my voice quiet but steady. My mother, Brenda, jumped in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Darling, your father is right. This kind of responsibility, all that money, it's a burden. You're a simple girl, you have a simple life. Let your father, a man with business experience, handle the complexities. We'll make sure you have a nice little allowance, of course. Enough for you to be comfortable. An allowance. From my own inheritance." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Kevin snorted from his chair without looking up. "Yeah, Clara. Just sign it over. I've got a new app idea, and I need seed money. You don't even need that cash." I finally looked at him. "Another app, Kevin? What happened to the last 3? His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with anger. "That's none of your business." My father stepped forward, pulling a folder from a side table and tossing it onto the glass coffee table. The sound was sharp and final. "Enough. These are the documents from our lawyer. Transfer of assets. You sign them, we put this unfortunate episode behind us, and we move on as a family." "And if I don't?" I asked. His eyes narrowed. "Then we contest the will. We will drag you through court, Clara. We will paint you as a manipulative gold digger who took advantage of 2 old people. We will drain your resources and ruin your name. Is that what you want?" I walked over and picked up the folder. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. I was to sign away everything. In exchange, they would provide a settlement at their discretion. It wasn't a deal. It was a surrender. I closed the folder and placed it back on the table. "No," I said. The word hung in the air for a second, and then the room erupted. "You ungrateful little brat," my father hissed, his face contorting. "After everything we did for you." "Did for me?" The words just slipped out. "You mean everything Grandpa and Grandma did for me. You weren't there. You were never there. The slap came out of nowhere. My father's hand cracked across my face, hard. The shock of it was so total I just stood there, the sting spreading across my cheek. My mother didn't even flinch. She just looked at me with cold, dead eyes. And then she delivered the final blow. "I think it's time you left, Clara," she said, her voice like ice. "Oh, and by the way, that lovely little apartment you live in? The LLC that owns the building, that's one of ours. Your lease is terminated. Effective immediately. The locks will be changed by morning." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My apartment. My home. My safe space. Kevin smirked, his thumbs flying across his phone. "Looks like your $26 million can't buy you a bed tonight, sis. Better pack fast." I stood there for a moment, the side of my face burning, my world crumbling around me. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out of that cold, white house, leaving the unsigned papers on the table. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew I had just lost everything. Or so I thought. I drove aimlessly, my mind a blank. Evicted. No home. My family had just declared war and fired the first shots. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station to get some coffee, to try and think. I went to pay with my debit card. "Card declined," the cashier said, not looking at me. I tried it again. Declined. I fumbled for my credit card. Declined. A hot, sick feeling washed over me. I had money in that account. I knew I did. I pulled up my phone and frantically logged into my bank app. My checking account, the one my mother had co-signed on for my first college fund years ago and was never taken off of, was empty. Balance, 0. She had drained it. Every last penny. Standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of that gas station, homeless and penniless, I understood. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. They wanted to destroy me. I paid for the coffee with the last $20 of cash in my wallet and walked back to my car, my body trembling. I had nowhere to go. My parents had taken my home, my money, my sense of security. They had pushed me to the edge, expecting me to fall. I sat in the driver's seat, the lukewarm coffee untouched, and just let myself cry. Hot, angry, terrified tears. When there were no tears left, a strange clarity settled over me. I thought about my grandparents. They had known. They had to have known this would happen. And then I remembered. Mr. Peterson. After the will reading, as my family was exploding, he had quietly slipped a thick manila envelope into my purse. "Your grandmother told me to give this to you, and only you," he had whispered. "She said you'd know when to open it." With shaking hands, I pulled it out. My name, Clara, was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant cursive. I tore it open. Inside was a set of keys, a single sheet of paper with an address in rural Wisconsin, and a handwritten note. The note read, "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the house no longer feels like home. I am so sorry. Your grandfather and I have worried about this day. We have made preparations. Go to the address. Trust only those who have earned it. And know that we are always with you. Love, Grandma Eleanor." The address was for a cabin, 2 hours north, just over the state line. A place my grandparents used to go to escape the city. I hadn't been there in years. Hope, a fragile, flickering thing, sparked in my chest. I started the car and drove north, into the dark. I found the road just as the sun was beginning to rise. It was a simple, weathered cedar cabin, tucked away behind a stand of tall pine trees. It looked humble and safe. One of the brass keys fit the lock perfectly. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like my grandmother was wrapping her arms around me. The air smelled of cedar, lavender, and old books. The lights worked. I opened the pantry, and it was fully stocked with canned goods, pasta, coffee. On the small kitchen table sat a package wrapped in brown paper, with my name on it. I unwrapped it to find 5 thick, leather-bound journals. My grandmother's journals, dating back 10 years. I sat down and opened the most recent one. Her neat handwriting filled the pages, documenting everything. Family dinners, arguments, phone calls. And then I found it. An entry from 8 months ago. October 12th, Richard called again. Demanded $50,000 for another of his surefire investments. When Arthur refused, he became ugly. He said that if we didn't support him, he would find a way to cut Clara out of our lives. He said she was a bad influence, turning us against him. The threat was clear. My heart aches for that girl. We must do more to protect her when we are gone. It was all there. A documented history of their greed and their threats. Proof. The floorboards behind me creaked. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. A man was standing in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and the calm, watchful eyes of a man who had seen trouble before. He held up his hands slowly. Easy, Clara. My name is Markham. I was a friend of your grandfather's. From the Marines. I recognized him then, vaguely. A quiet man who always stood at the edges of my grandparents' summer barbecues. Your grandparents asked me to look out for you, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. If things got bad. Before I could process that, another person appeared behind him. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Lucia Ramirez, she introduced herself, stepping inside. But you can call me Sarah. Your grandmother was my godmother. And my mentor. I handle digital problems. They weren't just friends. They were guardians. Sentinels. My grandparents hadn't just left me a cabin, they had left me an army. A small one, but a loyal one. We spent the next day huddled around the kitchen table in the cabin, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. It was the first time in weeks I hadn't felt completely alone. Sarah, with her fingers flying across her keyboard, was a whirlwind of digital efficiency. Markham, a quiet and reassuring presence, secured the property and made sure we were undisturbed. Sarah laid out what she had found. Your grandparents were meticulous, she said, turning her laptop screen towards me. They had private security cameras installed at their house after your father's threats started. Everything is on a secure server. My stomach clenched. Everything? Everything, she confirmed. She clicked a file. A video popped up, timestamped 2 nights after the funeral. It showed my parents, Richard and Brenda, letting themselves into my grandparents' house with a key they obviously shouldn't have had. The footage was grainy, but undeniable. I watched in sick fascination as my mother pocketed my grandmother's jewelry from the bedroom, and my father rifled through the office desk, stuffing files into a briefcase. Breaking and entering, theft. Markham murmured, his eyes hard. It gets worse, Sarah said. She pulled up another file. Bank records. A series of business loans from my grandparents to my father, totaling over $200,000, that were never repaid. Then she showed me the digital trail of my mother emptying my bank account. A clear case of illegal fund transfer from an account she was no longer legally authorized to control for you as an adult. That's a federal offense. I just stared at the screen, a cold fury building inside me. This wasn't just greed. This was a pattern of theft and deception that had been going on for years. Then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I knew who it was. Heard you ran away. Doesn't matter. We're coming to get what's ours tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be ready. Kevin. The arrogance, the stupidity of putting a threat in writing. I slid the phone across the table to Sarah and Markham. Sarah read it and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Oh, he has no idea what he's walking into. Markham nodded, his jaw set. Let them come. We'll be ready. The fear I had been carrying for weeks was finally gone, burned away by a cold, clear purpose. They thought I was a scared little girl who had run away to hide. They were about to find out how wrong they were. We spent the rest of the evening making calls. First, to Mr. Peterson, who was horrified but not surprised by what we had found. He agreed to drive up from Chicago first thing in the morning. Then Markham made a call. Sheriff Miller? It's Markham. Yeah, Arthur's friend. I'm up at his old cabin. We've got a situation. I think you're going to want to be here tomorrow morning. My grandparents hadn't just left me evidence. They had left me a plan. A shield. And now, it was time to use it. The next morning, the cabin was no longer a refuge, it was a command post. Mr. Peterson arrived at 8, his briefcase full of legal documents. Sheriff Miller, a big man with a calm presence and eyes that missed nothing, arrived at 9, accepting a cup of coffee from Markham as if it were a routine morning visit. Sarah had her laptop connected to a large monitor on the wall, a devastating slideshow of my family's crimes ready to go. I stood by the window, watching the gravel road. The compass my grandfather gave me was warm against my skin beneath my shirt. I wasn't scared. I was ready. At precisely 10:02 a.m., they arrived. A procession of arrogance. My father's black Mercedes, my mother's white SUV, and my brother's leased sports car, spitting gravel as it skidded to a stop. My Aunt Carol was with them, looking nervous. They piled out of the cars, their faces set in grim, determined lines. They looked like a conquering army coming to claim their prize. The pounding on the door was loud enough to rattle the windows. Markham opened it with deliberate calm. Where is she? My father demanded, trying to push past him. Markham didn't move an inch. She's expecting you, he said, stepping aside. My father strode in, followed by the others, their eyes sweeping the room, expecting to find me crying in a corner. And then they saw who was waiting for them. They froze. Their eyes landed on Mr. Peterson, then on Sarah at her laptop, then on Markham standing by the door. And finally, they saw Sheriff Miller, in his full uniform, calmly sipping his coffee from an armchair by the fireplace. The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hand flew to her pearls. What is this? My father stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. What is the meaning of this? I stepped forward from the shadows of the kitchen. I believe you're here to get what's yours, I said, my voice steady. Clara, my mother gasped. You brought outsiders into a family matter. You made it a legal matter the moment you started committing crimes, Sheriff Miller said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't even get up. My father laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. Crimes? That's ridiculous. We are here to rectify a mistake. My parents were manipulated. Their inheritance rightfully belongs to the family. Is that so? Sarah said sweetly from her laptop. She clicked a button. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. And there it was. Crystal clear security footage of my parents and my grandparents' home. The whole room watched in dead silence as my mother swept jewelry into her purse. We watched my father stuff documents into his briefcase. My mother made a choked sound. My Aunt Carol stared, her mouth wide open. That footage has been logged as evidence, Sheriff Miller said conversationally. Breaking and entering, felony theft, the DA is going to have a field day. Sarah clicked again. The screen changed to show Kevin's social media post, my face plastered next to the words dangerous gold digger. And that, the sheriff continued, looking directly at my brother, who suddenly seemed to be trying to shrink into the floor, is called defamation of character. It carries some hefty fines here in Wisconsin. Sarah clicked one last time. A screenshot of my bank account. The large withdrawal and the transfer to an account in my mother's name. Mr. Peterson stood up and walked toward them, holding out a thick envelope. This contains documentation of that illegal transfer, which is a federal crime, Brenda. It also contains copies of the unpaid loans you took from your parents, Richard, and sworn affidavits from their staff about the threats you made. He placed the envelope on the table. If you contest the will, if you contact Clara again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, all of this becomes public record. And you will all be facing multiple criminal charges. Checkmate. My father stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. My mother was pale, trembling. Kevin wouldn't look at anyone. You set us up, my father whispered, the words hollow. No, I said, my voice clear and strong. I didn't. Grandpa and Grandma did. They knew you. They knew exactly who you were. And they prepared for it. No one shouted. No one screamed. The fight was over. They backed away, one by one, their greed and anger replaced by a sick, dawning fear. They shuffled out the door like defeated soldiers. My father was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway and looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred that was chilling. This isn't over, he muttered. But the tremor in his voice told me that it was. When the sound of their cars faded down the gravel drive, a profound silence settled over the cabin. It felt as though the house itself took a deep breath, cleansed of a long-festering poison. I collapsed into a chair, the adrenaline finally leaving my body, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Markham placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You did good, kid, he said. They underestimated you. They always had. That was my greatest advantage. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal filings and financial decisions. Mr. Peterson secured the estate, locking it down completely. Sarah built a digital fortress around my life, ensuring my family couldn't touch a single part of it. The threat of criminal charges kept them silent and distant. For the first time in my life, I was truly free of them. The number, $26 million, still felt unreal. It wasn't my money, it was my grandparents' life's work. I knew I couldn't just sit on it. That wasn't what they would have wanted. With Mr. Peterson's guidance, I established the Hayes Foundation for Integrity in Engineering. We endowed a multi-million-dollar college fund to provide full scholarships for underprivileged students who wanted to build things, just like Grandpa Arthur did. We funded community workshops and local STEM programs. It wasn't charity, it was an investment in the values they held dear. I didn't quit my job. I liked my simple life, my quiet apartment, my work that made sense. The money was a tool, a shield, but it wasn't my identity. I built a new family. A chosen family. Markham, Sarah, and Mr. Peterson became my circle of trust. We had Sunday dinners at the cabin, filling it with laughter and easy conversation, things my childhood family dinners never had. 6 months after the showdown, I drove to the cemetery. I laid a bouquet of my grandmother's favorite lilies on their headstone. The air was crisp, and the sun was warm on my face. I did it, I whispered to the quiet stone. I didn't let them break me. I didn't let them destroy what you built. I pulled the small brass compass from my pocket. It felt warm in my palm. I finally understood its meaning. My grandparents hadn't just left me their wealth. They had left me their values, their wisdom, and a community to protect them. They had given me a direction, a true north. The real inheritance wasn't the money in the bank accounts. It was the strength to stand my ground, the wisdom to know who to trust, and the courage to build a life based on loyalty and love, not blood. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. Thank you so much for listening to my story to the very end. It means the world to me. If you've ever had to fight for what's right, even against the people you're supposed to trust, I'd be honored to hear about it in the comments. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories.